Welcome to the Dairy News and Views podcast, a production of the Iowa State University Extension and Outreach Dairy Team. Our podcast covers current educational, research, and industry tools available for your operation to manage healthy cows and calves while producing the highest quality dairy products.
Thanks for joining us today on Dairy News and Views from the ISU Dairy Team. I'm Jen Bentley, Northeast Iowa Dairy Field Specialist, and today I'm here with our Extension Dairy Team, giving a recap of our discussions during our winter meeting series. So welcome back to the podcast, Dairy Team. As we all get on the call here, why don't you all introduce yourselves to our listeners?
So I'm Larry Trimble, Dairy Field Specialist in Northeast and Southeast Iowa.
Yeah, it's good to be back, Jen. Gail Carpenter, State Dairy Extension Specialist out of Ames.
Good morning, Jan. I'm Fred Hall, Dairy Specialist in Western Iowa.
It's great to have the team on, and it seems like every January we brave the winter and get out to our winter meeting series. We host these in different parts of the state, and so we had 5 different meetings throughout Northeast and Northwest Iowa, and it always brings up great discussion between ourselves. We learn from our producers, there's students there, industry folks who all attend to put input into the discussion. And this year we made Raising Your Dairy Best Heifer our topic and got some really great perspectives from Northeast to Northwest Iowa. And so over the next few podcasts, we're going to be sharing some of our summaries from our topics that we shared and some of the discussion points that we had around each of these topics. So before we get started with our first topic, why don't you all share just what you most enjoyed about this year's Dairy Days program before we get into our topic?
Well, Jen, this is the second year I've been involved with Dairy Days, and the first when I sit and I look at my calendar when we first plan these, it's 5 different events where we, from our perspective, we're doing pretty much the same agenda every time, right? Like I'm gonna have to give the same talk 5 times to all these different locations, and it always seems, first week of January when I'm looking at that, I always think like, wow, that's gonna kind of get old after a while, but I honestly think that, with the different producers that we have at each location and the discussion that we get, like it's a whole new program every time. So I really enjoy every time I go somewhere, we get to hear different perspectives from different producers. We have good discussions. Something new comes out, even if we've already given that talk 3, 4, 5 times before, new discussion comes out and you can kind of take a different approach and kind of look at things from a different angle. So that's what I really enjoy about it the most.
And I would ditto the discussion part of it. I just thought we had great discussions at all the dairy days. And, part of the reason I love working in Extension is just working with the dairy farmers and just they're very neat people. They come from neat families and just a nice, wholesome life that they try to live on the dairy farm there. And I love being a part of it.
What I enjoy is the differences. We're all dairymen, we all milk cows, but we talked with dairymen who milk 40 cows in a tie stall barn and dairymen who milk several thousand cows. And I really enjoy that discussion when you see different perspectives.
And I would agree with all of that. And it just, it brings a different perspective. And I feel like my presentation probably changes from the first time that I present to the last time because there's a lot of different questions being asked, and then that brings up new discussion for the next meeting and incorporating that into what I learned from other producers and industry to share back out to the next group. So yeah, really great experience. And I'm glad that we can continue that program here in Extension. So, well, for today's program, Larry and Gail, you both presented Raising Your Dairy Best Heifer. And so I think we're going to kick that off as our first topic here surrounding our dairy days. This one was talking about productive life and using dairy heifer records to reach our heifer goals. So I don't know who wants to kick it off, Larry or Gail, if you want to kind of give what you were talking about there.
I'll start off with just, as you mentioned, the productive life. And I think part of it was why heifer maturity matters. And we were at the 4th State Dairy Conference in June of last year here in Dubuque. And we had a Dr. Gavin Staley from Diamond V talk about this topic. And I just was very impressed with the slides and just the thought process that he kind of went through. And so, so the bottom line is that I think the average lactation of so many dairy herds is pretty low in that 2.1, 2.2 average lactations, which means that productive life is actually quite limited. Because when you take a look at the economics of that productive life, it sure would be nice to get 5 lactations out of a lot of these cows when you try to balance the genetic potential of the cull cows moving out of the herd, the genetics moving in. And you also balance that with the cost of raising heifers. So a lot of times it's kind of in that mid-second lactation where we first even recover the raising cost of these heifers. So it's a pretty important piece that a lot of these heifer cows are not even recovering their replacement rearing costs. And so when we take a look at a couple things like that, so we realize that lactation greater than 2 and 3 are the most profitable cows. And so we need to have a lot of those cows sometimes in our 5th and 6th lactation if we're going to try to get these average lactations up a little higher. If we look at some other countries like New Zealand, Australia, and Ireland, and a few places like that where that productive life might even be getting into the 4 average lactation. So it's not probably attainable to get it into the 5 on average, but there definitely is a lot of room for improvement. And I think when we take a look at some of the key factors of trying to lower their days in milk, but also try to increasing their peaks and persistence, I think are quite critical with it. So any thoughts on that, Gail?
No, I think that's well said, Larry. And a lot of what we talked about too was not just the increasing productive life, but how your heifer raising program can kind of tie into that too, and making sure that you are raising your dairy best heifer, right? So, and I called it in my presentation the healthy heifer cycle, making sure that we are investing in those replacement animals, making sure that we are getting them set off on the right foot, getting the most out of our investment. That decreases our need for heifer inventory in the long run. So we're not spending as much money on raising heifers because we're not having death loss, morbidity, mortality, those heifer cull rates that kind of can drive needing more heifer inventory sometimes. And then that just in turn kind of leads to a more productive cow that can produce more productive heifers in the long run. So it's kind of a positive feedback loop there. And Jen's talk, which we're not going to talk about today, you'll have to stay tuned for future episodes, but I think Jen's talk kind of tied in with that as well, talking about making sure that there's high risk points in a calf's life, right? That pre-weaning time, we really focus on reducing scours, respiratory, making sure that we're doubling our doubling our birth weight by weaning. But then we can't forget about heifers at that weaning transition as well either. And so Jen's gonna stay tuned to hear more about that from Jen in a couple podcast episodes. But it all really ties together, and you can't just get a calf on the ground and forget about her, right? It's something that we really need to be thinking about investing in that replacement in the long run.
I think that's pretty key, Gail. I think another piece of the talk was just with the heifer maturity matters, that Dr. Gavin would always kind of mention this Peter Pan problem. And I wasn't a big Peter Pan fan, but I finally realized what he meant by that is that Peter Pan never grew up. And there's a lot of heifers out there, it's especially from the perspectives when you take a look at the records, heifers that just don't completely mature. And so part of the thought process that we shared was, how to make sure that they're 95% of their body, the mature body weight for the herd.
85.
85. Right. Okay. I said that backwards, on 85 as well. So when we take a look at just the whole thought process of are they mature enough? Because from a lot of the graphs that they were showing on quite a few of the herds, we try to raise them to calve at 23 and 24 months, but a lot of them are trying to actually calve them in at 22, 21 and 20, and they basically didn't have that percentage of their mature body weight when the day they calved. And so that got to be a lot of milk loss. And it's not just milk loss, but it also has an impact on the culling rate of those animals a little bit later on in their life, and metritis and some other issues with that as well. So the whole concept of making sure that these heifers are mature enough the day that they calve is a huge one, because they can't make that up. And so trying to make up that energy lag, so they'll try to grow it, but it's going to be at the expense of lactation. And I think part of the data showed that they're about 7 to 8 times more energy inefficient to try to make that up during lactation versus trying to do that prior to that calf, the first calf.
Yeah, and I think an important point to kind of emphasize that came out of your talk was, we kind of think about age at first calving and body weight at first calving, but we really need to be making sure that we're thinking about both of those things too. So making sure that, for one herd, they might have an optimal age at first calving that's a little bit older than another herd because their heifers grow a little bit slower, but that's really herd dependent and dependent on your genetics and your heifer rearing strategies. So to me, that's kind of where the records come back into it, right? Because we can talk about how do you know when your heifers are at the right body size? Because a breed average just really isn't going to cut it when you look at the variation in body size, just even within breed. If you can talk, you walk on some farms, Holsteins got giant, growthy, showier cows, and then you walk on to other farms that might breed for a more moderate size. So knowing the mature body weight of your herd, and knowing what your targets are for your herd based on that, that's where records really starts coming into that too, as well as making some of those culling decisions. I mentioned respiratory earlier. We're kind of getting to the point where if we have heifers that have a lot of respiratory issues or are chronic, are getting touched a lot for pneumonia treatment or whatever it is, that those heifers aren't going to be productive cows in the long run, and probably aren't worth investing in and bringing into the lactating herd because they're always going to struggle for their whole life. And that record keeping is really an important way to kind of keep track of who those problem animals are before they kind of get to that lactating herd there. But kind of, going back to some of the differences that we talked about, I don't think there's one cookie cutter cut and paste way to do records for all herds either. We talked to people who use PCDART or other herd management softwares, and we talk to people who use paper records. There's no one correct way to do records for every single operation. So good record keeping practices can fit into your farm, whether you're using fancy herd management software, the newest herd management software, or whether you're still doing it the pencil and paper way.
One of the most interesting discussions, Gail, was when you were talking about how do we determine that, body weight, the concept, well, I just average my cull cows. Probably not the right way to do it, but what is the time we need to be weighing those cows?
Well, yeah, good point, Fred. The way that, we kind of, cull cows are easy because we generally know what they weigh, right? If we ship them to a sale barn, we're going to know what the body weight on those cull cows are. But the cows that get shipped to the sale barn are either going to be our super sick cows who are generally underweight, or they're going to be our cows who couldn't get bred back, or low producers, or some other reason. But usually it's poor repro. They didn't get bred back again, and so we kind of kept them around until they stopped making a profit, and now we're going to send them to the sale barn, and those cows tend to be overconditioned. So we're getting kind of the two extremes there when we're talking about our cull cows, and those might not really be representative of the mature body weight of our herd. So really, those cows are still growing a little bit in second lactation. So they'll reach their mature body size in probably third lactation, and then fourth lactation. So third and fourth lactation cows is what we recommend for getting an estimate of mature body weight. Because they've stopped growing at that point. We also want to make sure that they're not in very early lactation or very late lactation. So we want to make sure they're not dropping body condition in that pre-peak period or putting on body condition as they get into late lactation there. So generally 1 to 200 days of milk is a good time to collect that body weight. A scale is a great resource if you have one on farm. Weigh tapes also work really well. Weigh tapes obviously are not going to be as precise. There's going to be a lot of variation still in that, but you can kind of counteract some of that variation the more measurements you take. So if you take more and more measurements with weigh tapes, some of those cows will measure on the weigh tape a little lighter than they actually are. Some will measure a little bit heavier, but hopefully the more weights you take, it kind of comes out in the wash there. So if you have a scale, though, great resource to really utilize. I think a lot of producers don't really understand the value of having an on-farm scale. Your nutritionist understands it, though. I guarantee you that. Your nutritionist knows that what a great resource that is for you. But that is something we kind of ran into as well, is people saying like, oh, I have all this data, like what can I do with it? And so I was collecting all that data and then I stopped because I didn't see what it was getting used for. So I'd encourage you, if you're kind of at that position, get in touch with your nutritionist or get in touch with somebody in extension, and we can definitely show you some of the value of that and talk you through some of that individually for your farm as well.
Yeah, Gail, I think there was some tools that we brought up during the discussion, because that weighing was a big topic, weighing those heifers throughout their productive life. And one of those tools that I wasn't even aware of was that Penn State heifer tool. I knew that they had created those benchmarks for the breed, but now they have one where you can actually plug in your own heifer weights, and then it basically builds the growth chart for your herd, right? So I think that's even a better tool, because then it really helps you measure for your own farm.
Exactly. Yeah. Like I said, the breed averages are okay, right? But they're just really not going to capture the variation that you have for your farm there. So the inputs that you need, besides the weights of your heifers, the inputs that you need are birth weight, weaning weight, heifer services per conception, what your target is for your herd for an age at first calving, and then your mature body weight. So get your weight tapes out, and it's pretty easy to collect some of that information right there. So, and probably, I'm guessing, Jen, we can put the link for that in the show notes for the podcast today.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I'll do that.
Yeah, one other thought I guess I would have was Gail was talking about the data and some of the records that when people look at a lot of these herds, they're one observation I guess that comes out of the data, just from one data point, if you can take your lactation 1 cows, their milk at week 10 of their lactation, it approximates the herd annual average milk production like on a daily basis. And so if you've got 82 pounds of milk and you're really trying to strive to 92, if your heifers aren't peaking week 10 at 92 pounds of milk, you'll never kind of reach that next level. And so these heifers that come in that are not matured are kind of a big basis of that herd milk production average. And so again, that week 10 lactation 1 milk, I think definitely is a pretty important piece to get at. So if we can't get, like I said, at 92 pounds, we're never going to get our herd average up there as well. And I think the difference between the lactation 1 and lactation 2 animals at week 5 of lactation is about 30 pounds, at least for the Holstein breed. And then you get another 8 to 10 pounds for lactation 3 and 4. And I think the data was also showing that if we're going to try to get up those averages, we need to get about 40% of our herd in lactation 3, 4, 5, and 6 to actually try to get that average number of lactations up a little higher. So if we don't have those, again, like I said, the lactation 5 and 6 cows, it's tough to get that average lactation up there.
Mm-hmm.
Any last comments or thoughts about heifer productive life?
No, I think that Larry said it. It's an important thing, and I know we have a lot of herds in Iowa that are already breeding for productive life. So that's really, and some of the producers we talked to at the dairy days were telling us that's something that they value. So just making sure that you're getting that return on those genetic investments that you're making, and a lot of that comes back to just good, back to basics management, making sure that calves are well fed and well ventilated, and that heifers are bred at the right time, and that we're not getting over conditioned heifers, and that we're kind of getting some, that's not always the sexiest feedback to give, right? A lot of it just comes back to what drums we've been beating here for a while, and some of the stuff that we've been preaching that maybe seems a little bit old, but it definitely still pays off for everybody.
Yeah, I think you said that quite well. So to make sure that we're breeding for it, but feeding for it is probably going to be just as important. Like, to kind of summarize about how important that maturity is at that day of calving. And so the whole concept is just that we need more of these golden girls in our herds that are in that, like I said, lactation 3, 4, 5, and 6 to try to reduce it, because I think we have this impetus, and maybe it's kind of a psychological thing that we try to reduce our reduce the feed costs going to these heifers. So let's breed them early. Sometimes there might be some pressure to move these heifers out of the pen, out of the breeding pen or whatever. So maybe we might breed them a little bit early, but there definitely are some both economic and other good reasons to actually try to have that done. But if in reality they're not mature enough, then we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot by trying to to do that.
Yeah, I'll add to that though, Larry. I'm a nutritionist, so I like what you said about, feeding them right, not just breeding them right. But I'll, caveat that and say you can't feed your way out of bad management either. So it's the trifecta of your genetics, your nutrition, and your management really all tie together to raise your dairy best heifer.
Well said.
Well, a really great summary. And I think if listeners have more questions, they can feel free to reach out to us with questions on their own herd or tools that we talked about here today. Cross our fingers, dairy team, that we get our educational grant that we submitted this year, looking at this a little bit further, providing some educational resources and tools here in the next year and a half or so. So maybe we'll see some more things that we're doing on this heifer end as well. So again, thanks for joining us today, and we look forward to visiting with you on the next Dairy News and Views from ISU. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
Thank
Jen.
you.
This institution is an equal opportunity provider. For the full non-discrimination statement or combination U /diversity /EXT.